Welcome, YouTubers. Today we are covering a deck tech on Jolene the Plunder Queen. For 2 generic mana, 1 red and 1 green, she is a 2/2 human warrior with a wall of text. Whenever a player attacks one of your opponents, that player creates a treasure. If you would create 1 or more treasure tokens, instead create those tokens plus an additional treasure token. There's also the ability to sacrifice 5 treasures to put 5 +1/+1 counters onto Jolene. Just from reading those abilities explains the game plan of the deck. You attack, you make treasure. And that's it. Also, there's a word of warning. You will inevitably hear somebody sing the song Jolene every time you play this deck. And it will always be off-key. Since the theme of this deck is creating treasures and attacking, Ragavan, Lannery Storm, Magda, and Professional Facebreaker all create treasures upon being declared attacking, tapped, or by dealing combat damage. Ragavan also has the added benefit of exiling the top card of an opponent's library, the defending player, if it deals combat damage, and you can cast that card until the end of turn. Magda can easily cheat out our win cons with her second ability of sacrifice 5 treasures, search your library for an artifact or dragon card, put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. So she's a tutor, but puts them into play. So we can easily, when she's out and have the treasures available, win the game. We also need some more expensive creatures that create treasures upon combat. Ancient Copper Dragon, Hoarding Ogre rely on dice rolls of a d20. Goldspan Dragon just needs to attack or be targeted by a spell. Old Gnawbone makes it so all of your creatures deal combat damage, or when they deal combat damage, you create that many treasures. That's an MVP of the deck. We also include some ways for our lands to make treasures for us. Brass's Bounty. When you cast it, you get a treasure token for each land you control. Bootlegger's Stash gives your lands the ability to tap to create a treasure token. Tireless Provisioner, whenever you play a land, or whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a food or treasure token. We're always going to go treasure on this one. And Treasure Vault. It's an artifact land that you can use for mana or sacrifice it to create treasures. Included in the deck are some ways to create treasure tokens upon creatures entering the battlefield under our control. Dockside Extortionist being the most notable one. It's an auto-include if you're doing a treasure strategy and are in red, unless you don't want to spend the money to buy it, because it's quite expensive. Roseroom Treasurer and Gala Greeters have the Alliance ability, so whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you can create treasures. That's an option for both of them. They both have other abilities on Alliance. Prosperous Innkeeper. When it enters, you create a treasure token, and whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. It helps keep us in the game longer if we're not as ahead as we should be. There are some other ways to make treasure tokens in our deck. Sticky Fingers enchants a creature, giving it menace, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. And when enchanted creature dies, draw a card. Impulsive Pilferer creates a treasure token upon death. It also has the Encore mechanic, which allows you to pay 3 and a red to create a token copy of it for each opponent that attacks that opponent if able this turn, and still maintains its death trigger of creating a treasure token. Stimulus Package has an enter the battlefield, create 2 treasure tokens, and gives us an alternate use for our treasures, where if somebody's destroying all artifacts, we can use all of them to create a 1/1 citizen creature token for each treasure. Shiny Impetus is pretty similar to Sticky Fingers, except it goads the creature. It's an enchantment aura that goads a creature, gives it +2/+2, and whenever that creature attacks, you create a treasure token. Tempting Contract gives our opponents a chance to create a treasure token on our upkeep. If they do, we make 1 for each opponent who did. Even our card draw spells create treasure tokens. Pirate's Pillage, Seize the Spoils, Big Score, and Unexpected Windfall all have the additional cost of discarding a card, but they create treasures and allow us to draw cards. There's also card draw that is dependent on us making treasures. Eye of Oblivion can only tap to draw a card when you've already created a token this turn. Treasure Map can fix the top of our library by paying 1, tapping it, and to scry 1, and then you put a landmark counter on it. When it reaches 3 counters, create 3 treasures and flip it to become Treasure Cove, which can tap for colorless mana or tap and sacrifice a treasure to draw a card. Another way to gain some card advantage is by playing Atsushi the Blazing Sky or Combustible Gearhulk. Atsushi creates 3 treasures or exiles the top 2 cards of your deck when it dies. When those are exiled, you can play those cards until the end of turn. Combustible Gearhulk, upon entering the battlefield, causes target opponent to have you either mill 3 cards or draw 3. If they choose mill, they take damage equal to the CMC of all cards milled this way. This can deal quite a bit of damage if they get unlucky in this deck. Treasure tokens being the theme of this deck, we include a lot of ways to double them. Well, 3 I guess, but Second Harvest is an instant that creates a copy of each token you control. Doubling Season and Parallel Lives are enchantments that double the amount of tokens you would create when you create a token. Doubling Season has the added benefit of doubling counters as well, which synergizes with our commander. Now we have the 2 most important creatures for treasure creation in our deck. Wolfguard doubles attack triggers like our commanders, and Zorn has the same ability as our commander of if you would create a treasure token, you would create an additional one as well. Since this deck is all about treasures, we don't need too many mana rocks and ramp, but we still include a couple, like Arcane Signet, Soul Ring, Solemn Simulacrum, Rampant Growth, Cultivate, and 3 Visits. There are some other sources of card draw and mana fixing in this deck. Toski makes it so whenever a creature we control deals combat damage to a player, we draw a card. The Great Henge is a mana rock that draws a card whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under control. That creature also gets a +1/+1 counter. Great Henge can also tap to gain 2 green mana and gain 2 life. Inspiring Statuary allows us to tap our tokens to cast non-artifact spells. We include some utility lands that care about treasures or care about getting our creatures back. Inventor's Fair, at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more artifacts, you gain a life. You can also pay for, tap it, and sacrifice it to search your library for an artifact, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle your library. Homeward Path allows us to get one of our big threats back to our side of the board if somebody steals it. Since this deck is a combat-focused red-green deck, we should include some staples like Kessig Wolfrun and Rhythm of the Wilds, both allowing our creatures to have extra abilities and keywords. Seeing as how Jolene woke up and chose violence, we need some ways to protect her or make sure she gets through for combat damage. Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot boots both add haste and shroud or hexproof respectively. Whisper Silk Cloak and Rogue's Passage make her unblockable. Whisper Silk Cloak also adds shroud. All decks need removal. We do have to have some in every deck. So in this deck, we have Beast Within, Chaos Warp, and Crack Open. We also have some bigger removal in Blasphemous Act, Reckless Endeavor, and Vandal Blast. Blasphemous Act deals 13 damage to each creature, costs 1 less for each creature on the battlefield. Reckless Endeavor doubles as a token generator because you roll 2d12s, choose one result as damage and the other as treasures. Vandal Blast destroys artifacts. You can destroy a target artifact you don't control, or you can overload it and destroy each artifact you don't control. Red has been getting some love lately in the counterspell game. It has Tybalt's Trickery and Deflecting Swat. You could go for Red Elemental Blast or Pyroblast if you're on a cheaper budget. Now we know what this deck does. We need to win with it. Dragon seemed the appropriate choice to close out games. Hellkite Tyrant, Terror of the Peaks, and Balefire Dragon are our choices. Hellkite Tyrant, whenever it deals combat damage to a player, gain control of all artifacts that player controls. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 20 or more artifacts, you win the game. This is one of our win conditions. Terror of the Peaks could be a win condition too, because whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Terror of the Peak deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target. We have a lot of big power creatures, so Terror of the Peaks could shoot somebody's life total pretty low, or take them out of the game entirely. Balefire Dragon's like a pseudo board wipe. When it deals combat damage to a player, it deals that much damage to each creature that player controls. Since we're talking about winning the game, we include some combos like Darksteel Forge and Mycosynth Lattice, and Mycosynth Lattice and Clock of Omens. Now these don't outright win us the game, but Darksteel Forge and Mycosynth Lattice make our board indestructible artifacts, and everybody else's board all artifacts. That combined with a board wipe that cares about artifacts is huge. Uh, it allows us to keep our board. Flock of Omens, Mycosynth Lattice, and Magda is an infinite treasure combo, if you choose to do that. Blightsteel Colossus felt like an auto-include for win condition for me, because you can easily lead it out or cast it early with all those treasures, and it just needs to connect once, so it cares about combat too. Now we have the easiest way to win a game. Reckless Wire Weaver has whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. And on the conservative side with Jolene and a token doubler out, we could easily create 10 artifacts a turn. That's 10 damage to each opponent. Now that I've talked you through a potential way to build Jolene, why should you consider playing her? Well, it's very easy to one-shot an opponent with commander damage with Jolene. You can easily cheat out dragons early. You could play giant artifacts early, or just flood the board with treasure tokens if that's what you care about. Anyways, thank you for watching my deck tech on Jolene the Plunder Queen. If you like this content, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and ring the bell.